The deafening sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon, fading into the distance as Wyatt Prescott rode his paint horse down the rocky slope. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ravaged landscape of the Texas frontier, illuminating the still smoldering remains of what had once been a small homestead. It was the summer of 1875, and the border territories remained as unforgiving as they were lawless. Wyatt pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth to block the acrid smell of smoke that hung in the air. His weathered hat tilted low over his eyes as he surveyed the destruction. Comanche raiders, most likely. The pattern was familiar to anyone who'd spent time on this stretch of land, quick, brutal, and thorough. He dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the hard, packed earth. At 32, Wyatt had seen more than his share of violence on the frontier. 10 years of driving cattle from Texas to Kansas had hardened him to many things, but the sight of a raised homestead still churned his stomach. "Nothing left here, Diablo," he muttered to his horse, who snorted in response. "Let's check for survivors, then be on our way." Movement caught his eye, subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight shifting among the debris near what remained of the cabin's porch. Drawing his Colt revolver from its holster, Wyatt approached cautiously, stepping over broken furniture and shattered glass. That's when he saw her. A woman lay half buried beneath fallen timbers, her dress torn and stained with blood. Her face was streaked with soot, and her chestnut hair fanned out around her head like a halo against the dirt. For a moment, Wyatt thought she was already gone, another victim of the frontier's brutality. Then her chest rose slightly, and a small breath escaped her lips. Wyatt holstered his pistol and knelt beside her, carefully moving away the debris that partially covered her body. She couldn't have been more than 25, with delicate features now marred by cuts and bruises. "Madam," he said softly, placing 2 fingers against her neck to feel for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A soft moan escaped her lips. "You're still breathing," Wyatt said, his voice low and determined. "That's enough." With gentle but efficient movements, he assessed her injuries. No broken bones that he could detect, though a nasty gash ran along her hairline, and bruises were forming on her arms and face. The blood on her dress seemed to come mostly from a wound on her shoulder, not life-threatening if he could stop the bleeding. "I'm going to move you now, madam," he told her, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Got to get you someplace safe before nightfall." He tore a strip from his own shirt, folding it into a makeshift bandage for her shoulder. Then he carefully lifted her, surprised at how light she felt in his arms. She stirred slightly, her head rolling against his chest. "T. Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Rest easy," Wyatt replied, carrying her to his horse. "I've got you now." Getting her onto Diablo took some maneuvering, but Wyatt managed to settle her in front of him on the saddle, supporting her weight with one arm while he took the reins with the other. With a soft click of his tongue, he urged the horse forward, away from the ruins of what had clearly been a vicious attack. His own camp was about 2 hours' ride to the north, near a stream that cut through a small grove of cottonwood trees. It wasn't much, just a bedroll, some supplies, and a small fire pit, but it was sheltered from the wind and hidden from the main trail. More importantly, it had clean water and was far from the scorched earth they were leaving behind. As they rode, Wyatt kept the woman secure against him, feeling each shallow breath she took. Occasionally, she would stir or murmur something unintelligible, but she never fully regained consciousness. Worry creased his brow as the light continued to fade from the sky. Head wounds were tricky, and he was no doctor. "Hang on," he told her as the horse picked its way carefully down a steep incline. "Not much farther now. By the time they reached his camp, the first stars had appeared in the darkening sky. Wyatt dismounted first, then carefully lifted the woman from the saddle. He laid her on his bedroll and quickly went about building a fire. Once flames were crackling, he fetched water from the stream in his canteen and set about properly cleaning her wounds. The shoulder injury looked worse than it was a deep cut that had bled freely, but hadn't hit anything vital. The head wound concerned him more. He cleaned it as gently as he could, using the cleanest cloth he had, then fashioned a proper bandage from strips of his spare shirt. Throughout his ministrations, the woman remained unconscious, though her breathing seemed to strengthen somewhat. In the firelight, Wyatt could see her more clearly. She was beautiful, even with the dirt and blood, with high cheekbones and full lips. Her hands, though scratched and dirty, showed no calluses, not a woman used to frontier work. "Who are you?" he wondered aloud, settling back on his heels. "And what were you doing out here alone?" As if in response, she stirred again, her brow furrowing slightly. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't make out. Wyatt leaned closer. "Water," she whispered. He quickly brought the canteen to her lips, supporting her head as she took small sips. Some of the water dribbled down her chin, but she managed to swallow a little before turning her head away. Her eyes opened, then just barely revealing irises the color of summer sage. "Where?" she began, her voice cracking. "You're safe," Wyatt assured her. "Found you at a homestead after a raid. You're hurt, but nothing that won't heal." She seemed to process this information slowly, her eyes drifting closed again. "They took everything," she whispered before slipping back into unconsciousness. Wyatt sighed, pulling his blanket over her. There was nothing more he could do tonight, except keep watch and hope she made it through until morning. He fed more wood to the fire, then settled with his back against a tree trunk, his rifle across his lap, and his eyes fixed on the mysterious woman whose life now rested in his hands. Morning came with a blaze of golden light streaming through the cottonwood branches. Wyatt, who had dozed intermittently through the night, was immediately alert when he heard the woman stir. He moved to her side, watching as her eyes fluttered open, clearer now than they had been the previous evening. "Good morning," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She blinked several times, confusion evident on her face as she tried to focus on him. Then, as awareness returned, fear replaced confusion. She attempted to sit up but winced in pain. "Easy now," Wyatt cautioned, gently placing a hand on her uninjured shoulder. "You've taken quite a beating." "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice stronger than it had been, though still raspy. "Where am I?" "Name's Wyatt Prescott. I found you half buried in the ruins of a homestead yesterday evening. Brought you to my camp to tend your wounds." He kept his tone matter of fact, maintaining some distance to avoid frightening her further. "You've got a nasty cut on your head and another on your shoulder, but nothing that won't heal with time." She reached up tentatively to touch the bandage on her head, wincing as her fingers made contact. "The homestead," she repeated, her eyes growing distant. "They came at dawn. Comanche." Wyatt asked, offering her the canteen again. She nodded, taking the water gratefully. After a few sips, she handed it back. "They came so quickly, I barely had time to." Her voice trailed off and tears welled in her eyes. "Thomas, my brother. Did you?" Wyatt shook his head solemnly. "I'm sorry, madam. You were the only one I found alive." The news hit her visibly, her face crumpling as she absorbed the reality of her loss. She turned away from him, shoulders shaking as silent sobs racked her body. Wyatt remained silent, giving her the privacy of her grief while staying close enough to offer support if needed. Eventually, her tears subsided, and she turned back to face him, her expression now composed despite the redness around her eyes. "I'm Tessa Lawrence," she said, her voice steadier. My brother and I came from Boston 6 months ago. He wanted to start a new life out west after our parents died. Boston's a long way from Texas, Wyatt commented, retrieving a small pouch from his saddlebag. He extracted some dried beef and hardtack, offering them to her. You need to eat something, Miss Lawrence, to keep up your strength. She accepted the food hesitantly. I've never. She began, looking at the dried meat with uncertainty. Just small bites, he advised. Chew it thoroughly. As she nibbled on the provisions, Wyatt busied himself with making coffee over the small fire he'd rekindled. The familiar routine gave him time to think about what to do next. The nearest town, Riverton, was a good 2 days' ride to the east. She was in no condition to travel that far yet, but staying out in the open wasn't a good option either, especially with raiders in the area. Mr. Prescott, Tessa said after finishing her modest breakfast, I'm indebted to you for saving my life, but I need to go back to the homestead. Wyatt looked at her sharply. There's nothing left to go back to, Miss Lawrence. There are things I need, she insisted, attempting again to sit up and succeeding this time, though the effort clearly cost her. Personal items, and I need to bury my brother. The determination in her voice gave Wyatt pause. He understood the need for closure had sought it himself after losing his parents to cholera years earlier. We can go back, he conceded, but not today. You need rest, and it's not safe. The raiders could return to scavenge what's left. Frustration flashed across her face, but she nodded reluctantly. Tomorrow, then. If you're stronger, he qualified. Now let me check those bandages. She submitted to his examination with quiet dignity, turning her head to allow him access to the wound at her hairline, and carefully pulling aside the torn fabric of her dress to expose the bandaged shoulder. Wyatt worked efficiently, cleaning both wounds again with water from the stream and applying fresh bandages from his limited supplies. You seem practiced at this, Tessa observed as he tied off the shoulder bandage. 10 years on cattle drives teaches a man a few things, Wyatt replied. Seen my share of injuries. Cowboys aren't known for being careful. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. And what is a cowboy known for, Mr. Prescott? Stubbornness, mostly, he said, the corner of his mouth turning up, and a fondness for bad coffee and worse company. Yet here you are, tending to a stranger instead of driving cattle. Wyatt sat back on his heels. Season ended early this year. Drought up north meant lower prices. I was heading back to my small piece of land near the Brazos when I found you. You have a ranch? She asked, interest flickering in her eyes. Not much of one, he admitted. Just 50 acres and a cabin, enough to keep a few horses and grow some crops between drives. He stood, stretching his tall frame. You should rest more. I need to check on Diablo and gather more firewood. Tessa nodded, settling back onto the bedroll. The brief conversation seemed to have exhausted her reserves of energy. Thank you, Mr. Prescott, she said softly, for everything. Wyatt nodded once, uncomfortable with gratitude, then moved off to tend to his horse. As he worked, he found himself glancing back at the woman periodically. There was something about her, a quiet strength beneath the refined exterior that intrigued him. She was clearly out of place in this harsh territory, yet she had survived when others hadn't. The day passed slowly. Tessa slept for much of it, waking occasionally to take water or a few bites of food. Wyatt kept busy maintaining the camp, checking his supplies, and keeping watch for any signs of trouble. By late afternoon, he was satisfied that they were alone and unlikely to be discovered. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Tessa awoke more fully. She managed to sit up on her own and even took a few tentative steps with Wyatt's help, though the effort left her pale and shaking. You're improving, he commented as he helped her back to the bedroll. But we'll need another day before attempting the ride to Riverton. "What about the homestead?" she asked immediately. Wyatt sighed. "We can go there first, but only briefly. It's not safe to linger." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the compromise. "Tell me about Riverton," she requested as he prepared their meager supper of beans and more dried beef. "Small place. Maybe 500 souls. Has a doctor, which is what you need. A couple of stores, a hotel, bank, and too many saloons." He stirred the beans thoughtfully. "Good people, mostly. Sheriff keeps order well enough. And from there, what becomes of me?" The question was asked quietly, almost to herself. Wyatt looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. "That depends on what you want, Miss Lawrence. Do you have family back east you could return to?" She shook her head. "No one. Thomas was all I had left." Her hands twisted in her lap. "We used nearly everything we inherited to buy the land and supplies. What little money remained was hidden at the homestead. If it was hidden well enough, it might still be there," Wyatt offered, though he didn't hold much hope. "Raiders were thorough in their searching." "Perhaps," she said, though she didn't sound convinced either. "In any case, I have few options. I could seek employment in Riverton, I suppose." Wyatt handed her a tin plate with beans. "Let's focus on getting you well first. Decisions can wait." They ate in companionable silence as darkness settled around them. The night sounds of the wilderness, the call of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustling of leaves in the breeze created a peaceful backdrop to their meal. "It's beautiful out here," Tessa said suddenly. "Despite everything, I can see why Thomas was so drawn to it," Wyatt nodded. "The frontier has a way of calling to certain souls. It's unforgiving, but there's a freedom in it you won't find anywhere else." "Is that why you stay? For the freedom?" He considered the question as he set aside his empty plate. "Partly. Never felt at home in civilized places. Too many rules, too many expectations." He gazed into the fire. "Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not who his family was or how much money he has." "That's what Thomas said." Her voice held a note of sadness. "He was the youngest son of a prominent Boston family, always in the shadow of our older brothers. He wanted to make his own way. And you, what brought you along on his adventure?" Tessa looked down at her hands. "I had few prospects in Boston. Our parents' deaths left me with the choice of finding a husband quickly or becoming a burden to relatives who barely tolerated me." A rueful smile touched her lips. "Thomas offered me a third option to come west and help him build something new. It seemed preferable to the alternatives." Wyatt could hear the unspoken regret in her voice. "You can't blame yourself for what happened," he said gently, her head snapped up, eyes glistening. "Can I? It was my idea to settle here rather than continue to California as Thomas initially planned. I thought." She swallowed hard. "I thought it was perfect. The land, the view of the mountains. I convinced him we'd found our home." "The raid would have happened wherever you settled in these parts," Wyatt told her firmly. "The border territories are contested land, has been for generations." She wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Perhaps, but knowing that doesn't bring Thomas back, does it?" There was no answer Wyatt could give to that, so he remained silent. After a moment, he rose and added more wood to the fire. "You should get some rest," he advised. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Tessa nodded, lying back down on the bedroll. "Good night, Mr. Prescott, and thank you again for your kindness." "Wyatt," he corrected. "Out here we don't stand much on formality." A small smile crossed her face. "Good night, Wyatt. Good night, Miss Lawrence." "Tessa," she countered softly, her eyes already closing. "If we're not standing on formality." Wyatt smiled to himself as he settled against the tree trunk for another night of watchful rest. "Good night, Tessa," he whispered, but she was already asleep. The journey back to the homestead the next day was slow and careful. Tessa, though still weak, insisted on riding her own horse, a gentle mare named Penny that Wyatt had found grazing near the campsite, apparently having escaped the raid. They traveled mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they approached the scene of devastation. When the charred remains of the cabin came into view, Tessa drew in a sharp breath. In the harsh light of day, the destruction was even more apparent than it had been in the fading twilight when Wyatt had first discovered the site. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, reining Diablo to a halt beside her. She nodded, her jaw set determinedly despite the pallor of her face. "I need to see it, to say goodbye." They dismounted, and Wyatt helped Tessa steady herself before they walked toward the ruins. The smell of smoke still lingered, though less potently than before. Nothing remained of the cabin except blackened timbers and ash. A few pieces of metal cookware lay scattered about a cast iron skillet, the frame of a bed, a bent fire poker. Tessa moved through the debris slowly, occasionally stopping to touch an unrecognizable remnant of her former life. Wyatt kept a respectful distance, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any signs of danger. The raiders were long gone, but the wilderness held other threats. "Thomas," Tessa said suddenly, her voice breaking. She had stopped at the edge of the cleared area, where the grass gave way to hard, packed earth. A mound of stones marked what Wyatt realized must be a grave. "They buried him," she whispered, sinking to her knees beside the crude cairn. "I didn't think. I expected." Wyatt moved to her side, understanding her shock. "Sometimes they honor those who fight bravely," he said quietly. Tears streamed down Tessa's face as she placed her hand on one of the stones. "Was it quick, do you think?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Wyatt lied gently. He had no way of knowing, but it was the kindness she needed in that moment. She remained by the grave for a long while, sometimes speaking softly to her brother in words Wyatt couldn't hear, sometimes simply sitting in silent communion. Eventually, she rose unsteadily to her feet. "I need to look for something," she said, moving back toward the ruins. Wyatt followed, ready to assist as she carefully navigated through the debris. She stopped near what must have been the back wall of the cabin, kneeling to brush away ash and charred wood. After a moment of searching, she found what appeared to be a loose floorboard that had survived the fire. With effort, she pried it up, revealing a small, hollow space beneath. From this hiding place, she extracted a metal box, blackened by smoke but intact. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "It's here," she said, relief evident in her voice. Inside were several folded documents and a small pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. "The deed to the land, what's left of our money, and some family keepsakes." "That's fortunate," Wyatt said, genuinely surprised. Most raiders would have found such a hiding place. "Thomas was clever about it," Tessa replied, a sad smile touching her lips. "He built a false bottom in the space. If someone discovered the loose board, they'd find only some worthless trinkets above the second layer." She closed the box carefully and clutched it to her chest. "There's nothing else here for me now." Wyatt nodded, understanding the finality of her statement. "We should head out then. It's a long ride to Riverton, and we need to find shelter before nightfall." Tessa cast one last look around the devastated homestead, her gaze lingering on Thomas's grave. "Goodbye, brother," she whispered. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned to Wyatt. "I'm ready." They mounted their horses and rode away from the ruins, heading east toward Riverton. Tessa didn't look back, but Wyatt noticed how tightly she gripped her reins, her knuckles white with tension. They rode at an easy pace, mindful of Tessa's injuries. The terrain was varied, sometimes open prairie, sometimes wooded hills. By midday, they stopped beside a small creek to rest the horses and eat a simple meal. "How are you holding up?" Wyatt asked as they sat in the shade of a large oak tree. "I'm managing," Tessa replied, though her face was drawn with fatigue and pain. "How much farther to Riverton?" "We won't make it today," Wyatt admitted. "It's at least another day's ride. We'll need to make camp tonight." She nodded, accepting this information without complaint. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after a moment. "You mentioned it yesterday." Wyatt was surprised by the request but obliged. "It's not much to tell. The land lies in a small valley with good water from a creek that runs year-round. The cabin's simple 2 rooms and a lean-to for storage. I've got a corral for the horses and about 10 acres cleared for crops." "You farm as well as drive cattle, enough to feed myself," he shrugged. "Mostly I grow corn and some vegetables, keep a few chickens for eggs. It's quiet, peaceful." "It sounds lovely," Tessa said sincerely. "Very different from Boston." "And from what you and your brother were building," Wyatt observed. "Yes, Thomas had grand plans. He wanted to establish a large ranch eventually, raise cattle and horses." A shadow crossed her face. "He was always looking to the horizon, dreaming of what could be." "A common affliction out here," Wyatt said with a small smile. "The land has a way of feeding dreams." "And crushing them," she added softly. They fell silent for a time, each contemplating the harsh realities of frontier life. Eventually, Wyatt rose to his feet. "We should continue if you're rested enough." Tessa nodded, accepting his hand to help her stand. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Wyatt's arm, catching him off guard. He released her hand quickly, busying himself with checking Penny's saddle to hide his reaction. They rode through the afternoon, the sun beating down relentlessly. Wyatt kept a close eye on Tessa, noting how she grew increasingly pale as the hours passed. Despite her obvious fatigue, she made no complaint, sitting straight in her saddle with a determination that impressed him. As evening approached, Wyatt guided them toward a familiar landmark, a stand of sycamore trees that marked a reliable water source he'd used on previous journeys. "We'll camp here," he announced, dismounting and moving to help Tessa from her horse. She practically fell into his arms, her strength finally giving out. Wyatt caught her easily, concern etching his features as he felt the heat radiating from her body. "You're burning up," he said, his voice sharp with worry. "I'm just tired," she protested weakly. "No, you've got a fever. One of your wounds must be infected." He carried her to a grassy spot beneath the trees and laid her down gently. "Let me check them." Too exhausted to object, Tessa allowed him to examine her injuries. The head wound looked clean and was healing well, but when he removed the bandage from her shoulder, Wyatt swore under his breath. The skin around the cut was angry and inflamed, with telltale red streaks beginning to extend outward. "This doesn't look good," he said grimly. "I need to clean it thoroughly and make a poultice to draw out the infection." "Do whatever you must," Tessa murmured, her eyes closed against the pain. Wyatt worked quickly, starting a fire and heating water from the nearby spring. He had limited medical supplies, but years on the trail had taught him to use what nature provided. From his saddlebag, he retrieved a small leather pouch containing dried herbs plants a Comanche healer had once shown him could fight infection. While the water heated, he gathered more herbs from around the campsite yarrow for its antiseptic properties, and the inner bark of the sycamore, which could help reduce fever. He crushed these together with a rock, creating a paste that he would apply to the wound. First, though, he needed to clean it properly. The hot water ready, he soaked a clean cloth and returned to Tessa's side.